leftists and some intersectional feminists seem to have rediscovered the idea of marriage. And for this, I just wanted to point out there were two things I wanted to point to. First of all, that Carl, back in November, wrote an article about the heroism of women, in which, the very act of having a baby in the first place, bringing a child to term and then bearing it, is pretty heroic. Certainly I couldn't do it. I don't know about you. Would you like to give birth? No, I would not. So salute to all the women in chat right now, because it is very heroic. You should check that article out. Very interesting. And also a more recent one where Carl had a discussion and a premium video with John talking about the feminist argument for abolishing the family, because this seems to be something that they are harping on. A lot of the more modern intersectional feminists don't seem to have a particularly rosy view.
Yeah, I mean, this comes back to our positive law and natural law thing again, and the state and the growth of the state. Natural law, the way nature intended us, was to live in families and extended families, and we've replaced the family and the responsibilities of the family with the state.
Yes, and when the state can subsidise any old thing, all the way from single motherhood to anything else like that, you're just encouraging the breakup of the traditional family
But once
structure.
the state takes responsibility for something like welfare or healthcare or whatever, then that responsibility is taken away from the family, and in taking away that responsibility from the family, you actually erode the power of the family. And that's before we get onto the subject of tax.
Yes, and a lot of these people I would describe, the people begging for government subsidies, I would describe as leeches and parasites, to put them in somewhat Randian terms.
Maybe they don't know. They don't know what they're doing.
They are acting upon their own rational self-interest, but at the same time, they're relying on the force, the coercive force of the government to get enable their own self-interests, which was where I would start to question the morality of it personally. As a result of the fact that some Western states, or at least states within the US, have started to push back on a lot of this stuff, it seems that some feminists are beginning to rediscover that you can, in fact, foster social cooperation without the force of the state being involved, and also stealing from others to fund yourself isn't the most morally justifiable thing to do. As a result of all of this, leftists seem to have rediscovered the concept of marriage, with this article hilariously titled, "Let's Start Charging Men to Have Babies," as if in any society before the current one, it worked in any other way. That was what the whole man goes out and does the work while the woman rears the child thing was about. We're, in a financial sense, being charged to have the babies, but it also comes together with the wholesome completeness of the family itself to create something that works much better than anything we could have intended.
It's just such a crazy interventionist worldview.
I know.
The idea that you would have some kind of fee, some kind of imagine for a moment you're a woman and I want to have a baby with you. So you would charge me the fee that do you charge me the fee, or do I have to go and pay the fee to the government? Is this a tax, a baby tax?
Well, she's pushing this as a market solution. So it's a personal fee you have to pay me specifically so that I will have your baby.
And who's going to administer it all? Who's going to make sure the fee gets paid? And so
Who knows? Who knows? I suppose it's just upfront, and then, who knows, I might just take that money and run. I might give you the baby and then take the money and run. Who knows? It's not a great deal, but...
But if you were like a woman in somewhere poor, Eastern Europe 25 years ago, or Thailand or somewhere, and you had a rich Western family who would pay a woman to have a child for them. I believe that went on in some cases. Maybe rich Americans would go and almost pay a foster mother, if you like, to have, I don't think foster mother's quite the right word, but they would pay women to have children for them. Maybe the mum couldn't have a child herself. And then they would take the child from that woman. Like, that was deemed heartless, awful, an exploitation of the woman, even if all parties were willing, and so on and so forth. But that's exactly what she's just describing with that headline anyway.
Things always come back round full circle, and now apparently that regressive and barbaric attitude is now progressive. So let's just read a bit of this.
Sorry, I keep interrupting.
It's no worries, I'm enjoying the conversation. But let's see what it is that this woman actually has in terms of a practical solution to this problem. Women had a good pandemic the last time round. Something actually came of it compared to this one, which is total Just over a century ago, the 1918 flu pandemic may have vanquished a decent chunk of the global population, so already we're starting with absolute nonsense. We might have killed a decent chunk of women, but women still came out of it looking rosier than they did before. But after witnessing mass death, plus the loss of their children from other preventable diseases like diphtheria and meningitis, women decided to actually do something about it. The women who were left over, I suppose. And I respect the positive attitude and looking on the bright side of life, but this might be pushing it a little bit. When, brackets, white American women get the vote 2 years later, because you got to bring race into something like this, don't you? They used their newfound political power to immediately pressure local and federal governments into action, resulting in the largest expansion of public health spending in US history up until that point. So, pushing for greater state power, public ownership of private enterprise, and more spending. So she's not really selling me on this idea so far.
Do you know why women got the vote?
No, actually.
One of the core arguments was in the First World War, many women entered the workplace in order to do the jobs that men had previously been doing because men were off fighting at war. I'm talking about the UK here, but the same will apply in the US. And one of the big arguments in the House of Commons to justify women getting the vote was the fact that women now paid tax.
That makes sense. That's in America.
So they were invested in society, in other words.
Yes, that makes sense. And Josh has an interesting idea, which is that the washing machine did more for women than feminism did. But,
it did.
But it's true, but also very funny and not particularly PC to say nowadays. But they carry on. It was wildly successful, fueling later large-scale door-to-door household hygiene campaigns and driving an 18% decline in childhood infectious diseases, with 20,000 fewer annual deaths compared with pre-suffrage mortality rates. Attributing all of this to the government without looking into whether there are any other potential rationales for all of this happening. Interesting to me. Then as now, women were overwhelmingly the early adopters of that revolution, washing their hands, boiling milk to kill bacteria, and refrigerating meat, while men generally resisted even the most basic public health directives, much as they've resisted wearing masks today.
What publication is this?
This is thenation.com.
This is insane.
This is nonsense, isn't it?
It's just nuts. It's like she's got some stats off, I presume it's a woman writing this, but it's like they've got some stats off Wikipedia and then rewritten history. Yes. And this idea that just as men don't wear masks today.
And the only reason people boil milk and boiled milk and refrigerate things nowadays is all down to the government and government subsidies.
Who invented the refrigerator in the first place?
I know. But once again, there's much better evidence of the benefits of refrigerating food and killing bacteria than there is to the effective of other certain things that she mentioned. Don't want to step on YouTube toes, just in case, but I think you know what I'm referring to.
Who was advising people to wash their hands?
Probably men.
Of course it was. They would have come out of medicine, which would have been at the time a male-dominated industry.
But
God almighty, people claiming these historical victories.
I think you need to understand the focal point of all of this, which is quite simply more children lived because politicians actually responded to the flush of new female voters and their demand for less death. Has government often been the facilitator of less or more death historically, would you say?
I think it's fair to say that the biggest murderer in all history has been government.
I would agree with you there. So this must sound like a sick joke to over 3.5 million mothers who've watched COVID-19 kill their careers, and then West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin cancel any hopes of paid leave or state-subsidized childcare, which is in reference to Joe Manchin's opposition to the Build Back Better bill, which was basically, if you looked into any of it, just, I think it was 1,500 pages of $2 trillion worth of subsidies, so that it meant from cradle to grave you had the government backing you up, because you can't take responsibility for yourself. No one could read it. It was that long, so who knows what else they slipped in there. So thank you, Joe Manchin, for avoiding that. Now, as we're starting to the complete loss of Roe v. Wade and a new bill in Missouri where the party of life, as long as it's cis, straight, male and white, just proposed after scuttled after a massive outcry, a ban on abortion for non-viable pregnancies, women everywhere are taking shallow breaths, apart from all of those women who were probably supporting the abortion ban as well. It's a death cult of motherhood that treats child rearing as a moral redemption for the sin of womanhood, a compulsory test of character for where there can be no cheating, like accessing modern healthcare, having a job, or securing affordable daycare. Do you see how awful this mindset is? This idea that having a child in and of itself is not something positive, is not something that can enrich your life, but is instead a moral and physical burden on you. Because that's how this is reading to me.
As I say, I've got 4 kids, and having a child changes women. I think it does. It changes their worldview. And, feminists would probably jump on me, but when you're at the birth of a child, a woman is nature's vessel. I mean, you could say a man is nature's vessel as well, because it's his job to fertilize the woman in the first place, or impregnate, or whatever word it is. But, at the birth of a child, I think there's no experience that puts you more in touch with the meaning of life than to be at a birth. And possibly you could say the same also to be at a death. But in that moment of childbirth, a woman is nature's vessel. And my experience is that many women mellow. I mean, we mellow with age anyway, but you mellow when you have a kid, and your values change, and your priorities change, and your worldview changes.
Yeah, everyone I've known who's had kids, and I can't wait to have kids of my own, but everyone I know who's had kids has immediately said it just completely changes your outlook on life. Many people become more, like you say, mellow, but also more conservative, more protective, and because they want what's good for their kids, and they can recognize intuitively what's good for their kids, and what is good for their kids is not this attitude in the slightest.
I live a sheltered life on the internet. I've got my little things that I read, my little blogs on Substack,
I'm sorry
and people
to
I follow.
Introduce this to you,
and of course, I can't believe this stuff is going on, and I guess it's all these crazy ideologies that you see. They've all got all these kind of articles and blogs, and no doubt videos and podcasts that are reinforcing it and developing it and exploring it. It's nuts.
This is the prevailing attitude in the schools as well. When I was growing up in high school, one of my teachers was actively telling everybody that they shouldn't have kids. This was a geography teacher who was very, very popular, actively telling us that if you have kids, you are going to be playing a part in the downfall of the world. Actively trying to get us to put our hands up and say, who's not going to have kids because you're going to be saving the world. And it's just complete indoctrination. And I can only look back now that I'm mature enough to recognize it and see that that's what was happening.
They just don't factor in progress, how we get better at doing stuff. They don't factor that in.
But so according to this woman, the only solution is to lean into our exponentially consumer-driven society and deploy a market strategy where women need to start charging men to have babies. Revolutionary. One hero is already leading the way. In a viral Reddit post, a 34-year-old man described his 29-year-old partner's all-business approach to having babies, because that's what you want in a romantic relationship, an all-business approach. complete with a 16-page ring binder breaking down the cost-benefit analysis and its impact on her career. Mate, get out of there. If she's giving you a 16-page binder for just maybe thinking about having the baby, imagine what it's going to be further on down the line when it comes to like college and university. Good God.
I thought marriage vows. Is that not marriage vows? It said it's a 16-page cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah,
there's marriage vows.
There's something a bit more, I don't know, wholesome about marriage vows than here's our business agreement. The TLDR is that it sucks. By now, our anemic American standards, the woman in the Reddit post is lucky because her company offers 6 months of paid leave at 50% of her salary, but considering the immediate income reduction she faces and her likelihood of getting mommy tracked, i.e. following a career path that offers greater flexibility to devote time to child rearing, costs and raises of promotions, she proposed that her partner pay her $50,000 to compensate for the loss in earnings. And I can only assume that this is up front. This is ridiculous. What you can do is if you get married, you can do this amazing thing where you spread the cost out over time, because the kids will end up costing you way more than 50 grand in the first place. And even as a market solution, being someone who appreciates markets and free markets myself, I can recognise that's a terrible deal. Why would you accept that deal?
I think it's 300 grand to bring a child to the age of 18 is the average, just under 300 grand, and that's not including school fees.
Yes, university and such. I've actually got the figures up. I'll talk about them in a moment. But so once again, that's an awful deal no one would take. So what guarantees would you have that the woman, especially one this demanding, isn't just going to go run off with your money? And also, it's not factoring into alternatives, which is that if I'm a man who can afford to pay up front 50 grand, that probably means that I've got some good money behind me, meaning I could probably go out and find a woman who's a lot less demanding than this one, because money talks, BS walks. This was apparently a huge turn-off for our author, who at no point suggests that he might have to take any leave, paid or otherwise, offered by his equally well-paying employer. It occurs to him that his behaviour might also be a boner killer for her, or that her relatively modest proposal, 50 grand, relatively modest, doesn't even begin to make up for the lifetime hit to her finances and career prospects. So, she is purely material here. It's like, if I have a kid, I won't have all of this money and career prospects, as if that isn't made up for by the fact that you're going to be a mother, you're going to be raising a child, doing something that I would describe as more meaningful than just climbing the soulless corporate ladder. But the beauty of her approach is that it doesn't matter whether he likes it or not. This isn't your grandmother's free baby store. Since when were babies free? Where men get to spawn and then carry on with their lives at no cost. And I've got the figures up here, if you want to highlight these for me. Thank you, John. So the basic cost...
What? 71 grand?
Apparently, this is from last year, but this is the absolute lowest. So cost of raising a child up to the age of 18 in the UK is 71 grand for a couple and 97 grand for a single-parent family, which is interesting because it means that the costs of raising a child by yourself actually increase. The cost can depend on the sex of a child, since it costs up to 79 grand to raise a boy and up to 110,000 to raise a girl. For all children, when taking into account additional costs, it increases to 152,000 for a couple and 185,000 for a single parent family. So that probably rounds up to about 300 grand in dollars, for instance. Maybe that's where you've seen the figures.
No. I thought it was about 280. I thought I must have got it wrong.
Well, this is just the figures that I found. Yours might be more accurate, but overall, having a kid, no matter what the circumstances are,
it's not cheap.
It's not cheap. Not cheap. Pretty expensive, especially if you want to put them through university. So if we go back to the article...
Can you just go back to that Motley Fool one? Just raise the next bit. What are the additional costs?
Additional housing, food...
Okay.
Clothing...
Okay. I mean, it's all slightly arbitrary how they calculate it, but in London it's much higher. Look at the cost of housing in London.
I can imagine.
Anyway,
in London,
I have a London-centric view of the world.
If we just go back to the article and get through the rest of this relatively quickly, no need to apologise. It says, welcome to the future where men use their fatherhood bonus, the documented salary advantage that working fathers receive compared with working mothers and childless men, to pay for the privilege of passing on the genetic material. No more entitlements. So she's found another way to rebrand the myth of the wage gap right there. And just to point it out, women without children in the same position as men, in the same age, earn on average slightly more than men in those positions. So it's all down to a matter of priorities. Do you want to be a mother? Because it's always been a choice nowadays that you can just decide to throw it away and not have kids if you want. But it's whether you want that or not. And I don't think most women do. And this is not the solution for that. It carries on, but I'll just sort of go to the end, and it goes, oh my God, I forgot about this part. Oh, and once all the baby making is over, here's the next condition: mandatory vasectomies as a condition for sex. Mandatory vasectomies. By then, Republicans will have fully criminalized birth control. No, that's not what Republicans want, which is itself already a responsibility borne disproportionately by women who are expected to reroute their reproductive systems to maximize male pleasure. This last part is a long shot, I'll admit, since relying on men to compromise themselves in any way is a fantasy. But then again, and this won't appeal to you at all, this next sentence, but then again, so is crypto. And that doesn't stop them. Maybe the solution is to rebrand our kids as IRL NFTs, then sit back as men fall over each other to invest. Sure, they may be disappointed when their bored apes turns out to be a crying baby, but at least they'll have gotten something out of it, which right now is a hell of a lot more than women can say. Can you feel the vehement hatred emanating from this paragraph? If this is how this author, Alexis Grenell, thinks of men in general, I don't know why she's even considering having a baby in the first place.
Yeah, she doesn't like men.
Yeah, she absolutely doesn't. So that's some nonsense for you. Ladies, even if you don't want kids, don't listen to anything that this woman has to say to you, because it's all absolute
Talk
nonsense
about
that will get
drawing
you
in.
nowhere. Thank you for watching, and if you appreciated that segment from the podcast Lotus Eaters, you can support us and find more content at lotuseaters.com. For instance, this new article from Josh Firm, The Unknowability of the Global Elite. And if you would like to find more from him and follow him, you can find him on Getter at Josh_Firm. Thank you and goodbye.